Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lecture 9.1, our fourth lecture in our combo unit of chapters 8 and 9 on the executive branch. So in this lecture, we're going to take a look at the powers of the president and basically how powerful the office of the presidency really truly is. All right, so let's take a look here, and I actually recommend that you guys take a little bit of time and actually pause this and see the graphic that's on the side, because it lays out really what the presidential powers are based on the Constitution, and it does a really good job. So basically, the Constitution laid out some really key powers for our executive because they realized that in creating the Constitution under the Articles of Confederation, we lacked in our government an independent executive to make decisions and to lead the country. Now, the other reason for this is that the founders also distrusted direct participation by the people, which is why we actually didn't have a popular vote in our elections until 1824. And it's also why we have the electoral vote now, and we're seeing some issues with the electoral vote, is because our founders distrusted direct participation. Anyways, some key Article 2 powers in our Constitution for our president are the commander. He's the commander-in-chief. They're the head executive, so they appoint cabinet members and other officials. They conduct foreign policy and appoint judges, as well as the other powers that you see on screen. All right, so let's talk about informal powers that our president has. So basically, you have to look at the president and see, okay, they have a very difficult job to do, different situations arise, and they kind of have to have a personal exercise of power. And as our country's grown throughout its history and faced all these different challenges and so forth, the personal exercise of power for our president has been added to through action and events and precedent. One example of what I'm talking about is Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase. There was nothing that was spelled out in the Constitution that the president could just spend money or give money to a foreign country to buy this giant tract of land, but he argued that it was an inherent power of the president to protect one of the powers of the president is protect the country, so inherently he should be able to use money to buy land to protect the country or expand the power of the country. Teddy Roosevelt is somebody that also did that quite often. I'm not going to actually talk about that. You guys can go into your book on page 247 and read that and see another example. And I suggest you do so because they do bring it up, some quotes from that on the test. But I want you to go look at that. All right. Then also you have to think informally, there are immediate needs. And if you guys remember, I've told you pretty much almost any exception to any governmental rule that we have in our have in this class, it's the Civil War in Abe Lincoln. And you can see that presidents act differently according to what's going on with immediate needs. And Abe Lincoln did this quite often. Because of the fluid situation that was going on with the Civil War the beginning of the Civil War after he was elected in 1860. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus in some instances, and a lot of people thought he was a dictator because of that. He rose an army of 75,000 men before he actually got approval to do so by Congress, because remember, their power is actually in Article 1 to raise a military, but nobody said anything because they knew they needed it. He also issued blockading of southern ports before a war was officially declared. And why? Because it was an immediate need. Here you guys can see an actual map of the Louisiana Purchase to see what I'm talking about with Thomas Jefferson on the previous slide, just to remind you guys what we actually got from that deal in 1803 with France. Okay. More on the informal powers and immediate needs. Franklin Roosevelt expanded the federal government's role in the economy. Think of the programs within the New Deal. He used Congress to create new social and economic programs off of that. You had George Bush, that he basically started to, after 9/11, although many people were upset over his election because of how close it was and whether or not he really truly got elected or not. At the time, people changed their tenor after 9/11, and he tried to bring the country together, and he declared a war on terrorism and worked to set up the whole Homeland Security and was given authority to fight terrorism very quickly. And remember, there are special powers that are granted during times of emergency. And why? It's because the president's the leader and they need to act quickly. And it's okay for them to do that, but as things drag on, that can become an issue. And this also extends to governors. And this is something here in Michigan we've seen with the current coronavirus pandemic. You have to look at it in terms of this powers during emergency with our governor, Governor Whitmer. Now, I know there are people that love her, and I know that people that don't like her. But to be honest, she's done a very good job with the pandemic. And yes, there was ruled that she used a law that shouldn't have been done, or should have been superseded by another law in some of her actions. But overall, she was using her powers as the executive in the times of emergency. The real big problem was the fact that I think people just got tired of the fact that it was going on for a long period of time, and they wanted to have a little bit more of a checks and balance. But that doesn't mean that she didn't do a good job. She did, and we're seeing that. You see that a lot of times during times of emergency, that presidents and governors are granted special powers. But usually, and this is where the difference is, and this is why I'm talking about our governor now, is usually those times of emergency subside very quickly. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where that's not the case. All right, just a few more slides. We're going to talk about the mandate of the people. A mandate is strong popular support, and it's one of the president's greatest sources of power. If you have the people support behind you, people are going to love you. And two presidents that I have on screen here, President Reagan and President Obama, did have the mandate of the people. And that was an important thing for them because it meant that they were followed. And it doesn't mean that they were always agreed with. That's not the case. But it does mean that they were popular. And if they have support, then things are generally going to go over well. Now, in today's world, especially with the 24-hour news cycle, popularity is changing almost daily. You're seeing all forms of mass media and communication to gain support, but also this can have a flip side and hurt their popularity. I mean, just look at Donald Trump. Media has helped him, but it's also hurt him. Specifically, I'm talking about Twitter. And then TV is still the greatest form of communication for our president, because even though we're seeing a transition to the internet and streaming, I'm still going to say streaming is still TV for this purpose. It's important because the majority or the main body of voters are older generations, and TV is what they're most comfortable with. Now, as we progress through that will change. Now, newspapers and magazines, their role has changed obviously throughout the years, but they still offer a forum or medium for discussion for what's going on within the presidency, what's going on within the country, and can give the president, as well as his staff and the government, an understanding of where the people are at. All right, now there are some limitations and within presidential powers, one being congressional override. Congress can pass legislation over a presidential veto with a 2/3 vote. They also can limit the effectiveness in carrying out legislation. An example of what I mean by this is Nixon actually vetoed the War Powers Act, but then they went over it. Another form of limitation is Senate confirmation power, and this can be a benefit to the president, but also a negative to the president. And I'm going to give you guys a couple examples of what I'm talking about. So we're going to talk about it in terms of Supreme Court openings because it's pretty current. So in Obama's second term towards the end, Justice Antonin Scalia died, and there was an open position. Well, the Senate was controlled by Republicans and would not grant his Neil Gorsuch, I think it was Neil Gorsuch at the time, it wouldn't grant his judge appointment confirmation to the Supreme Court. Whereas just recently you see Ruth Bader Ginsburg die, and in record timing, because of the Senate being controlled by Republicans, Trump was able to get Amy Coney Barrett into the Supreme Court. And that's how it can hurt or help you with Senate confirmation power. And then also there's the power of the purse. Remember who actually controls spending in the government. It's Congress. So that can actually kind of change or limit the president's power. And then also the power to impeach. And there's a video link there. You guys can check it out, talking about the impeachments of various presidents. Now, I didn't update this, but it should also have President Trump's name on here. We've had 4 presidents that have been impeached, or at least faced impeachment charges in our history, with Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump. All right, just a couple more here. Also, other limitations are the courts. So one such example that placed limitations on our president was the court case of Marbury versus Madison, which it's the Supreme Court's right to review legislative action. It basically means they have the power, it reinforces the power of judicial review, which means they can look at the actions of the president and rule them as constitutional or unconstitutional. An example of this you see on screen is they did rule some of FDR's New Deal programs as unconstitutional. Now, the size of our government, as it's grown over time in our country, has led to some limitations on our president. It's so big that it can actually fail to do things the president wants them to do. It can fail to give the president or his staff the proper info and understanding of what's going on so they could make a poor decision, but that can happen. And then you also have public opinion, and this has become more important in our 24-hour news world, where it can actually force the president into actions he may or may not want to do. And again, it all comes back to public opinion, down to the mandate of the people. If the people support that president or support the action, they're going to be more successful generally. All right, and here's some limits to the president's power. Now, obviously, this was when I created this was back when Obama was president, so it's quite old PowerPoint, but you can basically see what they can and can't do based on their powers as president. I would actually pause this here for a second and kind of gain an understanding of what you see here on the screen. All right, so now I got a little bit of these last 2 slides here. I just want to kind of address them. These are some video links. If they work, you guys can check them out. They're just for fun. They have no real, there's nothing really to them in terms of for you guys to do any work with. But they can just have some fun with it, or give you like an example of the oath of office for Obama, or how much power a president does have. And then here's some questions to review. Again, these right here, please pay attention to the actual daily lesson plan. And if I ask you to do these, if I ask you to do them in the daily lesson plan, then I do want you to put these in your lecture notes. If I do not ask you to do them in the daily lesson plan, then these are just for you to do with them what you will. You can choose not to do them, or you can choose to do them for practice. But again, with these questions, please take a look at the daily lesson plan to see if I'm asking you to answer them. All right, guys, that's all I got for you here in lecture 9.1. Have a good one.